The bell over the door at Harbor Diner ticked like a metronome for the morning rush. Alden Pike slid into the corner booth with his daughter's backpack on the seat beside him and the familiar ache in his shoulder clocking in with the coffee. Across the room, the new waitress with the tired eyes and the quick, careful hands moved like she'd memorized every spill before it happened. He noticed how she kept flinching at the sound of engines outside, and how she smiled anyway, like someone who'd decided a smile was armor. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Her name tag read Lena in block caps. She approached with a pencil tucked behind one ear, and Alden saw the smallest crescent of a bruise near the hinge of her jaw, the kind you learn to hide with foundation and a practiced tilt of the face. 2 coffees, Alden said, and then because the 8-year-old opposite him was already standing on the seat to read the pie board, and a short stack for the wild thing. It's not wild if it's syrup-powered, Lark corrected, and Lena's smile warmed around the edges. The bruise would be old in another day. Whoever put it there wasn't new. Alden watched the room the way a man does when the part of himself that survived Afghanistan insists on staying employed. He catalogued exits, mapped the path from the booth to the door, noted the way the kitchen window sticks on a bad hinge. He watched Lena's hands, steady when she poured, unsteady for half a second when the bell over the door chimed again and a gust of expensive cologne tried to own the air. A pair of men in matching slate suits came in first. Then the man they orbited, silver hair clipped close, coin-bright cufflinks, confidence like a knife held comfortably. The room bent around him even before the manager did. Alden felt the shift like temperature. He saw Lena freeze, and for a heartbeat her smile crumpled like a receipt. "Miss Harrow," the silver-haired man said, voice meant to carry. "Let's not make a scene." Harrow. Alden pocketed the name. Lena kept her eyes on the coffee pot. "I'm working." "You're finished," the man said. He didn't look at the manager, he didn't need to. He looked at Lena the way auctioneers look at livestock. "Get your bag." The closest suit moved to block the aisle. The other positioned by the door without even glancing at it. Alden's left hand slid along the vinyl to touch Lark's wrist. His daughter's fingers were ink-stained from last night's homework and the mechanical pencil she refused to cap. "Daddy," Lark whispered, eyes on Lena's face. "She's scared." Her voice was small but wired with certainty. "Please save her, Daddy." Alden didn't stand. "Not yet." Standing is a declaration. "First you count." He counted the suits. The distance from his booth to the coffee station. The angle of the sun through the window and how it made a mirror of the banged-up chrome napkin holder. He counted the breath Lena took that didn't quite make it to the bottom of her lungs. The silver-haired man, Harrow, touched 2 fingers to his cuff as if adjusting it. "This isn't up for discussion, Lena." He lowered his voice, not enough to be private. "You've embarrassed me long enough." The manager hovered with hands that communicated the universal language of "don't get me sued." Lena set the pot down so carefully it made no sound at all. Alden stood then, not fast, not slow. He had shoulders that made space where there wasn't any, a face a shade too calm, and a voice that men in doorways hear in their bones. "Sir," he said to the blocker by the aisle without looking at him. "You're between a father and his breakfast. It's a poor career move." The suit looked him over, saw the scar along Alden's wrist, did the calculation, and moved 2 inches. It was enough. Alden stepped past, placing himself where Lena could see him with a turn of her head. He kept nothing in his hands except his empty, steady palms. "Is this a domestic?" he asked Harrow, careful with the word. Harrow's smile didn't crack. "It's family." "He never said my daughter. He said family like a deed. You don't belong in it." "Then take it outside." Alden angled himself so his body removed one of Lena's choices, freeze or run, but gave her 2 better ones, speak or step behind him. He pitched his voice to her without taking his eyes off the men. "Lena, you want to stay?" For a beat, she couldn't find the word. Then she breathed it. "Yes." Harrow's eyes cooled. "You're done here," he told the manager, who flushed and looked like he wanted to argue with his own payroll. The silver-haired man tipped his head, and one of the suits reached for Lena's elbow. Alden moved before the touch landed. A hand like a vice closed around the suit's wrist, rotated gently, and the man's elbow bent in a way elbows prefer not to. It was a small lesson in leverage. The suit's grunt was polite. "You can leave by the door you came in," Alden said. "Or by the door marked employees only with a police report attached. Choose." The manager finally remembered he owned a phone. "I'm calling 911, he announced, which in certain moments is the most useful sentence English has produced. Harrow didn't flinch. He appraised Alden as a problem with 3 variables: age, training, willingness to escalate. "Who are you?" "Nobody you need," Alden said. He let the suit's wrist go. The man stepped back with a glance that promised they'd remember each other. "But she said she's staying." "Lena," Harrow said, as if coaxing a feral cat, "you know what happens if you test me." She swallowed. Her hands shook now, enough to make the coffee in the glass pot ripple. She set it down. "What happens?" she said, quiet. "Already happened." The sirens announced themselves in the distance like a future you can't outrun. Harrow's gaze didn't waver. "This is beneath you," he said to Alden in a tone older men used to invite younger ones into the club. "Walk away." Alden shook his head once. "I've walked away from the wrong things before." He looked at Lena again, and she met his eyes and nodded like she'd decided she was done drowning. The suits moved toward the door. Harrow took his time. He put a business card on the counter with 2 fingers, as if laying a blade on a table. "You'll call me in 2 days, he told Lena. "After you've paid rent and discovered your card doesn't work." He turned to Alden. "And you'll teach your child not to mistake strangers for saints." He left a tip large enough to be insulting, and the suits bracketed him out to a waiting black SUV, the kind that made its own weather in the parking lot. The diner exhaled. The manager's hands uncurled around the phone. A busboy laughed a hysterical note and turned it into a cough. Lark slid out of the booth and climbed back in again, the way kids test the gravity of a room. "You did it," she told Alden, and then in a whisper to Lena, "We." Lena's smile trembled as it found its footing. "Thank you," she said. The words sounded like a currency she hadn't used in a while. Then she remembered she was at work and started apologizing to everyone, because that's what you do when your life spills onto other people's tables. "Sorry, so sorry, he won't be back, I'm fine." Alden knew better than to ask, "Are you safe?" while adrenaline still had the lease. He nodded at the manager, who nodded back like men who had just survived a small storm together. He paid, over-tipped because dignity is expensive, and told Lark to finish her orange juice. Lena brought the check anyway and stood there like she wasn't sure if she wanted to slide it under his coffee or into the space between them. "I'm sorry you had to see that. Not the first time I've seen a man mistake ownership for love." He kept his voice even. "You have someone you trust you can call?" She almost laughed. "Trust is the first account he freezes." She tucked hair behind her ear and winced when her fingers brushed the bruise. "I'll figure it out." Alden recognized the word figure like he recognized the taste of copper before a fight. "My shop's 3 blocks down if you need a place to sit where no one knows your last name." He handed her a business card. "Pike's Auto and Marine." A phone number with paint on it. "And I'm not a saint. Ask my kid about my pancakes." Lark leaned in conspiratorially. "He burns the first one on purpose," she told Lena. "For the pan." Lena nodded like she'd file that for later. "I'll be okay," she said out loud, maybe to convince the room. Then the door chimed again, and the room flinched as one. It wasn't Harrow. 2 officers in Navy walked in, took statements, took Lena into the office to ask her the kind of questions that keep their reports neat. The manager said words like trespassed and threatened that made him feel brave. Alden gave his name and the minimum. He kept Lark busy counting sugar packets and naming the towns on the laminated placemat map. By the time the SUV with the flashing lights rolled away, the lunch crowd was turning into itself. Alden and Lark stepped into a sun that felt a shade too bright. He could feel the day rearranging around the decision he'd made without declaring it. He didn't regret it. Regret tastes like pennies, he'd swallowed enough. The engine of the black SUV across the street purred and faded away. He didn't see Lena again until closing, when the garage door at Pike's Auto ratcheted down and Lark was arguing with the shop radio about whether bedtime applied to inventors. Alden wiped his hands and looked up at the soft knock on the office glass. Lena stood there with the kind of careful posture you learn when every motion costs. She held a paper bag with the diner's stamp and a tentative smile. For the pan. Lark opened the door before he could. We have our own pan, she announced, but stepped aside because hospitality lives in kids like instinct. Lena stepped in with the smell of grilled onions and something sweet. I got off early, she said, which could have meant fired. She didn't say it. She placed the bag on the counter like a peace offering to a new country. I wanted to say, thanks. She glanced at Lark with a small, private conspirator's grin. And to tell you I'm not. I mean, I'm not running back to him. Good, Alden said. He gestured to the mismatched chairs. Sit. She sat like someone who wasn't sure she'd be allowed to get back up. He warned me, she said to the tabletop. About consequences. He likes that word. He thinks if he makes the world small enough I'll stop finding corners to hide in. She lifted her eyes. He's very practiced at making people feel like he's the only safe thing. Abusers make their own weather, Alden said softly. Then sell you umbrellas. Lena let out a breath that was almost a laugh. He likes to think he's weather. She looked around the office, at the pegboard of wrenches, the faded photos on the bulletin board, Alden and a younger Lark standing knee-deep in river water with a trout that looked like it didn't agree with the terms of the photo, an old unit patch tacked next to a calendar that was 2 months wrong. People must bring you broken things because they believe you can make them work again. The trick is telling them what can't be fixed and what's just going to run with a song in it, Alden said. What did the cops say? That it's a civil matter unless he touches me, Lena said flatly. Which he doesn't do when anyone is looking. She traced a ring of condensation on the table with her finger. He froze my accounts at lunch. The manager pretended not to know that. He suggested I take the night to think things over. She swallowed. He was shaking. Alden didn't say stay with us. He'd learned not to hand people a rope unless they'd asked for it. He said, I have a spare office you can sit in for a while. Lark has markers. We have more soup than sense. I can't be your problem, Lena said, but she had already softened into the chair. The paper bag on the desk opened its top like a blossom. Inside was a burger wrapped like a present and a slice of pie that glittered with sugar like a snowfield. This is payment. Cash is easier to deposit, Alden deadpanned, and Lark snorted into her sleeve. Lena ate as if she'd been asked to prove the existence of hunger. After, when Lark had successfully engineered a paper city on the floor and named the streets for every stray cat in the neighborhood, Lena stood. I should go back to my apartment while it's still light. Where? Alden asked, easy. Bascom Street. She noticed the way his face changed and laughed without humor. I know. Bascom was where landlords didn't ask too many questions because no one had answers. Do you want company? He asked. I want to be someone who doesn't need it, she said honestly, and then, yes. He locked up the shop and they walked. Lark did helicopter arms between them until Lena took her hand and the helicopter settled into a human. Bascom smelled like fried oil and last chances. Lena's building had a front door whose glass was a rumor and a stairwell light that had been promising to come on for several years. On the second landing, a door opened to the length of a chain. A neighbor with a cigarette and a baby on her hip eyed Alden like a problem you count before you decide if it's yours. He was sniffing around, she told Lena without preamble. Same car as the morning. I told him you moved. He told me my mouth was expensive. I told him I ain't had one worth paying for since '09. She grinned, tooth-gapped and fierce. Name's Shonda. You want me to walk the baby up and down the hall all night, bang the heels? I can make it sound like 12 men live here. Thank you, Lena said, and her voice cracked on the first word. I'm okay. Liar, Shonda said with affection, and swung the baby so she laughed. You holler. Inside, Lena's apartment was the kind people live in while they're making a plan. A mattress on the floor, a hot plate, a shelf of library books that made the room feel smarter by association. A plant straining toward a stingy window. On the counter, a phone face down and silent like a guilty thing. Alden walked the perimeter without making it look like he was. Locks? Poor. Windows? Worse. Hinge screws accessible from outside. He showed her with a quarter how to turn the screws so the window could still open for air but not for a man with a crowbar. He wedged a cut-off broom handle into the slider track. He pulled a roll of duct tape from his back pocket because men like him always have duct tape, and he used it to bank the corner of the window where the glass had a hairline crack, or maybe he just needed to do something with his hands. You can't fix my father with tape, Lena said gently. He met her eyes, surprised at himself. No, he took the tape down, set it aside. But I can do hinges. He crouched and tightened metal until the door sounded less like surrender. Why are you helping me? She asked finally. There was no defensiveness in it, only a tired curiosity. Alden considered telling the truth that would sound like a lie. Because my kid asked me to. Because a part of me wants to punch God when men like him win. Because I know what it is to be cornered by someone who likes how small you look in their shadow. He said, because I can. She nodded like she'd accept that for tonight. You should go before it gets dark. We're 2 blocks, he said. I'll walk you to the bus. I'll walk you to your door, she countered, and they both smiled at the choreography of kindness. They were almost back to the shop when the black SUV eased from a side street and idled parallel to the curb like an animal deciding what to do with them. The passenger window slid down and a voice as smooth as Hotel Stone said, Miss Harrow, I'm glad you came to your senses. Get in. Lena stopped breathing. Alden placed himself between her and the voice without thinking. The driver's gaze flicked through him to Lark, who stood very still with her hand inside Alden's. Cute kid, the driver observed, the kind of observation men make when they want to poison the air. Keep moving, Alden said to Lena and did not turn his head. The SUV paced them for half a block, a shark benevolently escorting swimmers. Then it slid away and vanished around the corner. Alden didn't relax until they were inside the shop with the door locked and the security system chirping like a polite bird. He made grilled cheese on the hot plate he kept for late nights. Lark drew Lena as a superhero with a coffee pot for a shield. Lena laughed until tears showed up without asking permission. She wiped them away and studied the drawing like a map of a country she might want to move to. The shop phone, the one with a cord, rang. Alden picked up because cords are honest things. Pikes. A man's voice, rich like the mouthfeel of expensive whiskey. Mr. Pike. We're neighbors now. Harrow, Alden said without asking. My attorneys will be filing a restraining order naming you and your child as destabilizing influences, Harrow said like he was reading a weather report. I'm also curious what the Department of Children and Families will think of your living situation. An auto shop after hours is not a home. Alden watched Lark glue a cape on the drawing with focus and an impressive amount of stickiness. Lena sat with her hands laced like she was holding her own fingers together. You do what you need to, Alden said calmly. So will I. Do you think you're protecting her? Harrow's voice was almost gentle now, the way men speak to dogs who don't understand the property line. I built the roads. You can't win on roads I built. Sometimes the shortcut is through the woods, Alden said, and hung up. He stood with the receiver in his hand, looking at the wall where the unit patch lived. He remembered humid nights in a place where the air itself could kill you, the taste of fear, the discipline of not feeding it. He remembered the rule that kept you alive, move slow, see everything, breathe. On the second day, Harrow made good on his promise. A woman with polite hair and a clipboard knocked on the shop door precisely at 4. She had a badge around her neck in the posture of someone who holds both authority and a desire not to use it. Mr. Pike? I'm Tilda Maris with DCF. We received a call. Come in, Alden said, stepping aside. Lark sat at the counter with math that was attempting to be about apples and was actually about patience. We're not hiding. Ms. Maris walked the space and made notes. Your daughter is enrolled at Harbor Elementary? Yes. She appears healthy, engaged, ahead in literacy. The call said she was left unattended while you entertained visitors at night. Tilda Maris's mouth folded delicately around the word entertained. We watched a documentary about ocean trenches and ate grilled cheese, Alden said, then decided to put the seriousness the moment deserved into it. Ms. Maris, a man with resources, is unhappy that I told him no. He's using every tool he can reach. Tilda looked at Lena, who stepped out from the office doorway with the kind of courage that gets you up in the morning. He's my father, Lena said, and the social worker's eyebrows performed a small, involuntary lift. He believes money is a parenting style. He's wrong. Tilda Maris had the face of a woman who had seen too much and not enough. She made more notes. She asked Lark to tell her about school. Lark delivered a 5-minute aria on the injustice of square pizza in the cafeteria. Tilda's mouth softened. We'll be in touch, she said, which could mean anything. For what it's worth, Mr. Pike, I've been to a lot of homes worse than this shop. After she left, Lena sagged against the door. He'll escalate. He's already escalating, Alden said. Escalation is just a ladder to other ladders. Are you always like this? Lena asked, a startled laugh escaping. Everything a puzzle? No, Alden said. Sometimes I am just tired. They found an attorney who wasn't impressed by cufflinks. Riven Coates had a law office that looked like a static-charged filing cabinet and a mind like a table saw. She listened to Lena's story without blinking, chewed a pen cap like it owed her money, and said, we don't have to win everything. We just have to win the next 10 minutes. What does that look like? Lena asked. It looks like paper, Riven said. Restraining orders. Emergency motions. It looks like an affidavit from your manager. Yes, I know he's scared. I'll scare him better. It looks like subpoenaing financial records that will make your father very interested in settling where he doesn't have to be seen. What if he doesn't care about being seen? Alden asked. Then it looks like a courtroom, Riven said, eyes bright. I like courtrooms. They walked out of Coates and Evermere with papers that made sound when you put them down and a calendar full of dates that would become the architecture of the next month. On the sidewalk, the black SUV idled 20 yards away with the patience of a crocodile. Alden's jaw worked once and then went still. That night, someone cut the power to Pike's auto at the breaker box and taped a single bullet to the glass door with packing tape, centered like a practical joke. Alden pulled the tape down and held the brass between 2 fingers. Lark slept through it because children sleep like Faith. Lena sat on the office chair with her knees pulled up, looking at the bullet as if it were an old family heirloom. Call the police, she asked. And tell them what? That gravity still works? Alden set the bullet on the desk. We document. We don't declare war unless we have a field. Where's the field? In daylight, he said. With witnesses. He installed a camera he'd been meaning to for 6 months and wired the breaker box so it would bite anyone without the code. He taped the bullet to a page in a notebook under the word evidence. He slept in the office with his boots on and a crowbar leaned against the desk, and if that sounded like a man who expected a door to try him, that was because he did. By morning, Harbor Diner smelled like cinnamon and rumor. Lena's manager, a pale man named Will who had a nervous smile that kept misplacing itself, called her in. Your father offered to buy the place, he blurted. Just so I'd fire you. I said no. Lena blinked. You said no? I said there's a difference between an investor and a colonizer, Will said, surprising both of them. Also he called me William in a tone that gave me a rash. He slid her a paper bag. You don't work here today. You get paid anyway. You show up tomorrow. This is soup. She took the bag like it might explode and then hugged it. Thank you. The day stretched like wire. Harrow didn't call, he didn't need to. His attorneys did. Riven volleyed. Lena learned phrases like expart and learned how to sit still while grown men explained her life to a judge like they were narrating a documentary about amphibians. Alden sat beside her in the courtroom in a shirt with a collar that felt like a costume and a quiet that didn't. There was a second when Harrow's eyes found Lena's across the aisle and softened in a way that would have confused anyone who didn't know strategy looks tender from far away. Lena looked down, counted breaths, remembered the weight of Lark's hand. They won the first 10 minutes. A temporary restraining order signed in ink that glistened like a promise. Harrow's counsel smiled like men who see the long game and are happy to sell you the first inning. We'll see you in 7 days, he said to Riven. Bring better arguments, Riven replied cheerfully. On the walk back, rain arrived without consulting the forecast. They ducked under the awning of a pawnshop where guitars and broken hearts were priced the same. Lark grinned into it like rain was a game that had chosen her. Lena tilted her face up and let it wash the courthouse air off. Alden stood very still and thought about how peace looks like people breathing at the same time. The black SUV slid by, slow enough to be a sentence. Alden stepped out from the awning into the wet, put his body where the message was supposed to land, and stared at the dark glass until he saw his own reflection looking back like a version of himself from a life where he hadn't learned how to leave. Let's go home, Lark said, and made it sound simple. Home was the shop, and then, after 3 days of soup and schedules in a fort built out of drop cloths, home grew into an idea that scared Lena and soothed her at the same time. She slept in the spare office on a cot that had been a cot in 3 different wars, Alden's, the shop's, and the war you fight to stay soft. Lark drew a star on the door with a marker and labeled it guest. But actually friend. In the morning, Alden taught Lena how to change a tire, because roadside assistance is mostly men being late, and in the afternoon, Lena taught Alden and Lark how to make pierogi from memory that tasted suspiciously like the word childhood. Lark named the first one Safest Dough. They didn't say family, not out loud, but the word sat in the room like a good dog, close enough to touch, wise enough not to jump on anyone. On the 5th day, Harrow stopped pretending. 2 men waited by the shop when Alden rolled up the door at 8. They wore the uniform of men who don't have a uniform, boots, black jeans, jackets that could hide strategy. One had a scar like an exclamation point by his right eye. Mr. Pike, Scar said. We're here to serve papers. I like paper, Alden said dryly. It doesn't bleed when you mishandle it. He took the envelope and read the first 2 lines. Contempt. Motion for emergency custody, of Lena. He handed it to Riven over the phone like he was passing something hot, which he was. You can tell your employer, Alden said to Scar, that if he keeps putting my name on legal documents he's going to say it wrong in his sleep. Scar smiled without mirth. He doesn't sleep. Lena came to the door and stopped like she'd found a snake on the mat. Scar's gaze slid over her with a familiarity that made Alden's hands want to be fists. Miss Harrow, Scar said, voice sliding. Your father says you're unwell. He wants you in a facility. For rest. I'm not sick, Lena said. I'm done. That's not a diagnosis, Scar replied mildly. It is today, Riven called from the hallway speaker, because she had let herself into their lives the way only the right attorney can. You can leave now. Scar's partner leaned, maybe to make a point, and made the mistake of letting his shoulder touch the doorframe with ownership. Alden didn't think. Some lessons you rehearse so often the body performs them like a song. He caught the man's wrist the exact way he had in the diner, rotated, placed, released. No one yelled. Everything was quiet. Scar's eyes got a shade colder and then, to Alden's surprise, a fraction warmer, recognition among men who speak certain dialects of force. We'll be back, Scar promised, as if he were a dentist. We'll be here, Alden said, as if he were gravity. After they were gone, Lena leaned against the counter and let herself shake where Lark couldn't see. Alden stood with her in the shaking without trying to stop it. When it settled, she said, I used to think he wanted me to be perfect. She laughed once, harsh. He wants me to be obedient. Perfection is a leash, Alden said. Obedience is the collar. Lena turned to look at him full on. Who taught you to talk like that? A therapist who deserved better clients, he said, and her laugh was a real one this time. In the afternoon, the camera at the breaker box caught a face under a hoodie, Scar's partner, reaching for the panel and finding out what a 12-volt surprise feels like. The man jerked, swore, and ran. Riven sent the clip to Harrow's attorneys with a note that read simply, "Oops." That night, Riven called. They filed for an emergency hearing at the hotel on Elm, the Harrow. Her voice made an art out of the word derision. They want to argue in a room where your father is a god and the chandelier agrees. Do we have to go? Lena asked, already knowing the answer. We win in daylight, Riven said. We go. The lobby of the Harrow was polished to a high, reflective threat. Alden's boots squeaked in a way that felt like blasphemy. Lena walked with her shoulders set to a height that said not today. Lark held her hand and looked at the ceiling like it was trying too hard, which it was. Harrow waited near the fountain in a suit that cost more than the blue book value of Alden's truck. Lena, he said, warmth applied like a trickle of honey. I'm glad you remembered your manners. His eyes slid to Lark and softened in a way that would have looked paternal if not for the way Lark's hand tightened in Lena's. He smiled at Alden. And you brought your mechanic. Charming. Courtroom, Riven said, which was the verbal equivalent of a hand on a spine. The hearing was theater with paperwork. Riven cut through the first act like a blade through silk. Harrow's counsel objected in 3 different baritones. The judge listened with the expression of a woman who had seen more marriages than a church. At one point, Harrow requested to speak as a father, and Lydia Cross, the judge with a name like a prophecy, said, no. They won the next 10 minutes. The restraining order stood. Harrow left with a smile that said movements, not moments. You won a point, he told Lena at the elevator. I own the game. You own a lot of things, Lena said, breath steady. Not me. On the way to the garage, Alden felt the hair on his arms lift the way it does when weather changes without permission. He placed his hand on Lark's shoulder, guided her to his right. The elevator dinged and released 3 men who wore their nothingness like a cloak. Scar was not with them. These moved like men hired by men who don't like to look at blood. Riven said, keep walking, like an order. Lena kept walking like a dare. Alden measured options, stairwell left, security desk right, a family 5 paces behind them with a stroller that could become a shield, the camera dome overhead watching a rage that would call itself liability if pressed. They reached the garage. The air changed from lobby to parking lot. Alden clicked the fob, the truck blinked its eyes at him. He opened the rear door for Lark and she climbed in with her backpack, unzippered because life is a series of unzippered bag moments. The 3 men fanned. Not a random thing left. Harrow wasn't careless, he outsourced it. Alden put the keys in his pocket and squared himself to invisible music. Riven moved to Lena's flank, a lawyer inexplicably ready to bite. Lark peered through the gap between the headrests with a frown like a small owl. Mr. Pike, the lead man said, voice smooth as an empty room. Come with us. No, Alden said, and the word rang like a spoon on a bell. Something in the lead man's face shifted, disbelief becoming interest, and then, above them, an engine revved in the next lane like a sports car rehearsing its lines. The black SUV nosed around the column. Its headlights carved twin rivers toward them. Alden's body understood before his thoughts did. He reached for the handle of the rear door to shield Lark, and at that same breath he saw Lena's reflection in the SUV's glossy paint, her mouth forming his name, her hand lifting not in panic but in decision. The SUV rolled to a stop a few feet short of their knees. The driver's window lowered. Harrow sat behind the glass with that pleasant half-smile that had bought 1,000 men's spines. He lifted 2 fingers from the wheel in a parody of a salute. Enough, he said softly. Get in, Lena. No, Lena said, and her voice didn't shake. Then watch, Harrow said, and tilted his head at the lead man. The man took a step forward. Alden moved, And time did the thing it does for people who have learned to make it obey, slowed to something you can read. Alden's hand found the man's wrist, the twist, the leverage. Riven stepped into the second man's path with a knee that suggested someone, somewhere, had taught her self-defense in a church basement. The third man reached for Lena's shoulder and found instead the edge of her keys, which she had palmed the way a woman does when she plans for the worst and hopes the worst is afraid of metal. "Dad?" Lark said from the truck, the question a thin wire through the chaos. "This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story." Chaos. It wanted the room, the air, the decisions. Alden refused at the lease. He stepped once, not back, not forward, but into the exact space that turned the lead man's reach into overextension. Wrist. Turn. Place. The man's eyes widened as if a hinge had been moved inside his arm. Riven's elbow met the second man's ribs with an authority that suggested she billed by the impact. Lena's keys found the third man's knuckles, metal sang softly. Behind Alden, Lark's breath made a bird's wing of sound. Inside the truck, Alden said without turning his head, voice even, the kind a person trusts when everything else is tilted. The truck door shut with the sound of a decision closing. "Enough," Harrow said again from the driver's seat of the black SUV, softer now, as if gentleness were a currency he wanted to flash. "You are making a spectacle, Mr. Pike." Alden released the wrist with the same care he'd taken to seize it. "Your men attempted to escort me somewhere I didn't want to go." "Escort," the lead man grunted, rubbing his arm. "Kidnap," Riven corrected cheerfully. Which, for the court record, is not a synonym. Harrow's gaze didn't leave Lena. Up close, the years in his face looked like scars that had learned to pose as character. "Last chance," he murmured. "Come home." Lena stood very still and discovered that stillness is a weapon if you own it. "I am home," she said, and the words surprised even her with their weight. The parking garage shifted then, not the concrete, but the attention. The hotel's security manager, a man with a mustache that lived in a previous decade, jogged into view with two uniformed guards and a radio chattering on his hip. "Sir," he called, to no one and to everyone. "What's going on here?" "Witnesses," Riven murmured, and her smile had teeth. Harrow's hands stayed on the wheel. "A misunderstanding," he said smoothly. "We were leaving." "No," Alden said, so calmly the words sat down between them like furniture. "You'll wait. Police are en route." He lifted his chin toward the dome camera in the corner. "They'll want the footage." The security manager's mustache twitched, its own barometer for liability. He looked at the lead man, who had the sense to put both hands where everyone could see them. He looked at Lena, who drew her shoulders back and let the restraining order in her purse carry some of her spine. "We'll hold everyone here," the manager said, relieved to have a rule to point at. Harrow's smile didn't fold. He rested two fingers on the horn in a delicate, thoughtful way but didn't press. "You keep mistaking this for a contest, Mr. Pike," he said in a voice that would have sold stock. "It's simply gravity." "Gravity works on you, too," Alden said. The police arrived with the theatricality of authority in motion, lights flickering on concrete, radios clearing throats. Statements were taken with pens that laid down judgment in blue ink. The hotel's camera footage was reviewed at a laptop balanced on the hood of a squad car. Riven narrated like a sports commentator who had seen this game played in 100 different cities. Pause there. "That's the reach. See? No weapons on our side. Yes, her keys, which are legal. That step? That is an attempt at physical coercion. The SUV's approach angle? Very instructive." The officers asked Lena if she wanted to file charges. She looked at Harrow and used all her quiet. "Yes." They separated the men. They separated the story from the version of it that Money would prefer. The lead man went into the back of a cruiser with his hands cuffed in front, which is how connection looks when it isn't consensual. The second man swore under his breath about lawyers. The third called someone and spoke in a dialect of apology that had nothing to do with remorse. Harrow remained outside of all the doors like weather. Your energy is misdirected, he told Alden, conversationally, as if they were two men admiring a sunset instead of a crime scene. If you'd brought it to my company 15 years ago, you'd be running a division instead of a salvage yard. I don't salvage, Alden said. I repair. Harrow's eyes warmed, a terrible and convincing magic. And her, he asked, with a little head tilt toward Lena. Is she reparable? She isn't broken, Alden said, and watched a hairline crack appear in Harrow's pose. Not much, but enough to prove he could find it. Officer Tilda Maris wasn't there, wrong department, but Luck has a sense of humor. The cop who'd taken their earlier report walked up and said to the security manager, "We'll need that footage, all angles." "Ma'am?" He gestured to Lena with gentleness that looked like practice. "You've got a protective order?" Lena handed over the copy Riven had made her keep in every bag, pocket, and glove compartment. The officer read, nodded, and said to Harrow, "Sir, step over here." His tone did not ask. It placed. Harrow obeyed like a king indulging a ritual he didn't believe in. For the first time, Lena saw a faint pulse of something human under the lacquer, fatigue, maybe, or the realization that even well-laid roads end. She didn't pity him. She catalogued it. When it was over, the men had citations. Harrow had a formal warning documented with a case number that would follow him like a shadow that had learned how to sign forms. It wasn't victory. It was traction. Outside, under honest sky, Lark climbed into Alden's lap on the curb and asked softly, "Did I mess it up?" "You made it better," Alden said, and meant it so thoroughly the words rang inside his chest. Lena sat beside them and looked at the two of them as if someone had put a light just under her ribs. Riven stood with her hands on her hips and did triage in sentences. "We keep the temporary order. We push for a permanent one. We file the criminal charges. We request hotel footage be copied to 3 drives, one for the court, one for our files, one for if the first 2 fall into a river." She grinned at Alden. "I'll even label them. I know you like a neat bench." "I like bolts in the right drawers," he admitted. "Same job," she said. The week folded into a new kind of routine, a routine with papers and affidavits and meals eaten in a shop that smelled like oil and coriander because Lena had decided spice was armor, too. Will from the diner signed a statement with his hand shaking only a little. Shonda from Bascom Street recorded audio of a conversation through her cracked door when one of Harrow's men came sniffing. "Tell your boss this hall is noisy tonight," she said into the phone afterward. "No man sleeps pretty here." The busboy from the diner uploaded a video he'd shot that morning to a cloud with a password that would take a mathematician to brute force. People who had watched quietly remembered how to speak. Harrow pivoted, because men like him always have a pivot. He called a press conference that looked like philanthropy and sounded like legacy. He announced an expansion of the women's shelter his foundation funded. Riven watched the clip with a look usually reserved for spoiled milk. "He is laundering," she said. "Publicly." "It's money," Lena said, exhausted. "It still buys beds." "True," Riven agreed, eyes narrowed. "And the Ledger filed a FOIA request the day we left the hearing." "I may have," pressed. When the story landed 2 days later, it didn't explode so much as rust a very visible shine. The Ledger's investigation mapped a lattice of donations that ended in companies with names like Sunfield Equities and North Glass Partners, companies that did very well building luxury condos on lots held by Harrow's Foundation for Blight. The article did not accuse, it annotated. The pictures were of Harrow cutting red ribbons. The captions were dates. The public drew its own arrows. "Does this help us?" Lena asked, sitting on the office floor with Lark, who was teaching her how to play war with a deck missing 8s. "It helps the judge call a spade without losing re-election," Riven said. "Sometimes justice needs permission to admit what everyone knows." Tilda Maris returned, this time with a smile that looked like a person had wrestled her bureaucracy and made it heal. "We're closing the file," she said. "And for what it's worth. I saw the footage. You did good. After she left, Lena let her forehead rest on the desk and cried for 3 minutes. Alden put a hand on her shoulder and didn't pretend it wasn't heavy. "Do you miss him?" Lark asked from the doorway, voice small and pointed at Lena's face like a question mark made of concern. Lena wiped her cheeks and considered truth. "Sometimes I miss the version of him I believed in," she said. "But I'm starting to like the version of me who doesn't." "Good," Lark said. "Because the version of you that makes pierogi is the best." That night, while Harbor Diner refilled salt shakers and the bay hummed like something sleeping, Alden sat with the unit patch from his wall between his fingers. He remembered the man he'd been, the edges he'd worn so sharp he cut himself on them. He thought about what fury builds and what it buries, about when to throw a punch and when to take a breath. He thought about how small Lark's hand had felt in the garage and how large her request had been in the diner. "Please save her, Daddy." Save is the wrong verb, he told the empty office, and the unit patch said nothing, as agreed. The next hearing was scheduled for Monday. The weekend stretched with the anxious elasticity of a bridge under load. Alden sharpened pencils and rearranged wrenches. Lena cleaned things that weren't dirty because sometimes control lives in lemon scent. Lark invented a board game called Courtroom, which involved paperclips and index cards and a rule that said whoever rolled a 3 had to stand up and say objection, in their biggest voice. On Sunday afternoon, the shop phone rang and no one moved to answer it, as if motion would trigger something. Alden picked up on the 4th ring. "Pikes." Scar's voice, he never gave his real name, came through like a penny dropped down a well. "You didn't hear this from me." "Almost certainly," Alden said, because sarcasm is a handhold on a cliff. "He's not going to wait for court. He's got a boat." "Tonight," Scar said, words clipped, like a man cutting himself on his own conscience. "He wants a picture of her coming back to him. He wants the judge to see it. He wants to say she reconsidered." The pier at Gallows Point. 11. "Why tell me?" Alden asked. Scar exhaled. "I don't hurt kids." The line went dead. Riven's office turned into a war room. She called the DA. The DA called the chief. The chief called a pair of officers who didn't owe Harrow favors. Tilda texted, on her personal phone, "We'll be there." Shonda sent a prayer in 3 emojis and 5 words, "Don't let him set the weather." "Do we go?" Lena asked, face paler than the paper on the desk. "We don't go alone," Riven said. "We go wired. We go logged. We go with witnesses who get paid in pensions, not donations." Alden checked the batteries on everything twice. He held the microphone that would sit under Lena's collarbone in his palm and hated it. He clipped it anyway. He showed her how to press the button and when not to speak. He showed her how to stand so the camera, Tilda's partner had a vest cam, would see Harrow's hands. "At any point you want to stop, we stop," Riven said, kneeling so she and Lena were eye to eye. "You owe no one a performance." Lena nodded and then shook her head. "I owe myself a finish." Gallows Point didn't earn its name, it had been rebranded from something uglier into a destination where couples watched sunsets end without asking permission. The night stood up around them in clean lines of pier lights and the soft slap of water against pilings. The Harrow Hotel's neon scripted itself on the bay like a promise made by someone who lied well. The black SUV arrived as if it had been told the choreography by God. Harrow stepped out alone, which was the loudest lie yet. "Lena," he called, his voice finding her in the darkness like a dog that knows which house has meat. She stepped forward, the mic tucked under a throat that had learned not to close. Alden and Riven stayed in the shadow of a bait shop roof. Tilda and her partner ghosted the far side of the pier. A patrol boat idled without drama 20 yards out, an engine pretending not to exist. "Thank you for coming," Harrow said, and to anyone listening without context he sounded like a man who had learned to forgive. "I knew you'd pick family." "I did," Lena said. "I picked me." Harrow smiled and didn't let it reach his eyes. "I have the papers in the car," he said, gesturing with a hand that caught the pier light like jewelry. "I withdraw everything. The motions, the calls. You come home." We fix this. The recorder is live, Riven whispered into Alden's ear, and he nodded although she couldn't see him. Lena walked closer because a person eventually gets tired of shouting across distances. What is home to you? She asked. Harrow tilted his head like a therapist in a cartoon. Safety, he said, the lie so soft it had a blanket. Structure. Love. Ownership, Lena translated. Scheduling. Obedience. She stopped a yard away, where the wood boards began to creak a steady heartbeat under their feet. Do you hear yourself? I hear a daughter, he said, and for a second, a true second, something like a father showed its face and then ducked back behind the professional liar. I hear fear confusing you. Listen to what's underneath this, Riven hissed for the recording, because she couldn't help it. Come look at the water, Harrow said suddenly, switching tactics so smoothly he might have been born in a car dealership. He turned his back to her, trust offered like bait, and walked to the very edge where the green-black bay moved without opinion. Your mother loved this view. My mother left because of this view, Lena said, stepping after him, voice steady. The mic captured both wind and truth. You put her on this pier and told her you'd jump if she didn't promise to stop taking art classes. Harrow went still. The past had not been invited to this pier. That's not. It's on the tape now, Riven said pleasantly in Alden's ear. Keep breathing. Harrow turned, slow, all the danger back in his face. You always did lie beautifully, Lena. Projection, Riven murmured like she was calling bingo. Leave the recorder, Tilda's partner whispered over comms. He's going to make a move. Harrow took one step closer. Last chance. Lena took one step closer, too, because fear is a leash you can cut if you keep your hands steady. I'm not a chance, she said. I'm a person. He lifted his hand. Not closed, not a fist, just hand angled toward her cheek in a parent's pantomime. The patrol boat's engine whispered. Tilda's partner moved, a shadow detaching from shadow. Alden's body understood it would move even if told not to. Harrow's fingers touched air. Then he realized the air contained a microphone. He looked at it the way a man looks at a snake too late. That is consent, Riven breathed. Say the line, Lena. Dad, Lena said softly, so softly it sounded like love to anyone who had not learned to tell love from leverage. You are violating a court order. Harrow's face broke in a way mirrors do when dropped into stories. He lunged. Alden was already there, one forearm finding Harrow's wrist, the other firm against his shoulder, stopping momentum without offering pain. Harrow twisted, feet slid, a shoe lost traction on algae slick wood, and for a heartbeat, physics remembered what it does. He fell. A clean, surprised splash. A gasp from the few pedestrians on the far end of the pier who had been pretending not to watch. The patrol boat turned with the economy of men who practice. 2 officers hauled him out fast enough to give the lie to the word drowning. Harrow stood on the deck dripping like a very expensive saint who had failed the miracle portion of the audition. He coughed once, looked directly at Lena, and laughed. Not humor. Something else. Arrest me, then, he said to the police, voice raw. Arrest a father for talking to his daughter. We're arresting you for violating a protective order, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and witness intimidation, Tilda said, climbing down onto the boat with a steadiness that made command look simple. Please place your hands behind your back. Harrow did, as if he were practicing, the humility, the photo, the eventual column where he would be quoted about forgiveness. He watched Lena even as the cuffs clicked. I forgive you, he told her, and the words were so twisted they had to crawl to leave his mouth. I forgive me, she said. You don't get a vote. The patrol boat motored toward the dock, bureaucratic lights painting the water official. The few onlookers clapped because people clap at endings they can understand. Not over, Riven said, eyes on the dark beyond the lights. He'll post bail. He'll throw filings at us until the paper budget cries. She put a hand on Lena's arm. But this is a turn. Alden exhaled a breath he'd been holding since the SUV rolled toward his knees. He felt something unclasp in his chest, one hinge at a time. Lark's small hand slid into his. "Was that the woods?" she asked. "That was the woods," he said, and Lark nodded like she'd been hoping the trees were real. In the days that followed, there were headlines, small ones, because other cities were on fire and the world kept making bigger noise. There were court dates and continuances and a judge who sighed with relief when the footage matched her instincts. There was Shonda bringing over lasagna baked in a tin that had been around since a different century. There was Will quietly starting a tab he insisted was for staff morale, which Lena paid off with hours and pies and the kind of generosity that doesn't need a check. Harrow posted bail. Of course he did. He emerged from the courthouse with his hair behaving and his lawyer translating the weather. "We're confident in the process," the man said to cameras, as if processes had ever stopped bleeding. Harrow looked into the lens like it owed him money and said nothing at all. Riven prepared like winter. "We don't underestimate a man who thinks he's the climate," she said. "We insulate. We stack wood. We keep fire in the grate." She filed a motion to move the case to a different county. The motion got lost and then found itself. She smiled and kept stacking. Lena returned to the diner. The first morning felt like walking into a room after a fire, when you don't know if the smell is gone or just waiting to rise when you open a drawer. The regulars looked up and then pointedly away, which is how kindness wears its shyness. Will put a clean menu in her hand and said, "You want your old shift or do you want the earth?" She took the shift because earth could wait. A man at the counter left a note under his coffee cup, "We've got daughters, too." She folded it into her pocket like a talisman. Alden tuned an engine that had been coughing since Reagan and thought about how some problems are solved by torque and timing, and some by showing up every day anyway. Lark invented a new game called Peer Laws, which mostly involved making her stuffed animals raise their paws and say "I consent" before she served them tea. He let her. He loved her for it in a way that was so big it scared him, and he held very, very still so it could settle without tipping. At the next hearing, Riven spoke for 9 minutes in a row and used words like predicate and pattern, and the judge leaned back and listened like a person who had finally been given the map she knew existed. Harrow's counsel objected on the grounds of something. The judge overruled on the grounds of something larger. The restraining order became permanent. The courtroom held its breath and then let it go. After, on the courthouse steps, Harrow stopped them the way men with money stop traffic. "This is beneath you," he told Alden again, exhausted by the world's refusal to behave. "You could have come to me." "I did," Alden said. "I said no." Harrow looked at Lena. "You will regret this when the world is colder than you were brave." Lena stepped close enough that he could count the freckles he had ordered covered with foundation when she was 17. "I'm not cold," she said. "I'm free." She nodded to the patrol car idling at the curb. "Your ride is waiting." He didn't get in. He turned to go the other way, into the warmer car with the private driver, into the next strategy. Lena did not watch him leave. She turned toward Alden and Lark and the lawyer with the table saw mind and smiled without permission. They didn't celebrate. They went to the bay. They sat on the bench where fishermen tell the same lies and cycles that match the tides. Lark threw bread to birds that didn't deserve her generosity. Lena leaned her head on Alden's shoulder like a question that already knows the answer and is just collecting confirmations. "I don't want to be a story where the guy saves the girl," Lena said after a while, watching the horizon find itself. "I want to be the story where the girl saves herself and the guy stands between her and the world while she does it." "You are that story," Alden said. "And if you want a guy in the margins, we've got one who burns the first pancake on purpose." Lark, who had very good hearing when adults thought in metaphors, grinned without looking back. For the pan. The bay breathed. The sky minded its own business. A goal stole bread it had not earned and the world failed to end. Weeks later, not in a leap, but in the measured beat of days, you could find a day when Harrow's name was a headline below the fold and then a day when it was not a headline at all. Lena kept the restraining order in a kitchen drawer under the takeout menus, and sometimes she touched it the way people touch a scar they've made friends with. Riven sent a holiday card with a cartoon of Lady Justice wearing steel-toed boots. Tilda brought by a kid's book about boundaries that Lark read in one sitting and then declared too obvious and asked for a more advanced text. On a Tuesday that did not announce itself, the door of Harbor Diner opened and a woman a decade older than Lena walked in, holding a phone with a picture on the screen. It was the article about the foundation. "Are you Lena?" she asked. "I left a man like your father last week." I didn't know how to say the word leave until you did it out loud. Lena poured her coffee. "It gets louder," she said. "The leaving. And the staying gone. Sit where you can see the door if it helps." After the woman settled, Lena stepped into the kitchen and stood with her back against the wall until her breath remembered how to behave. When she came out, Alden and Lark were in the corner booth. Lark had a math workbook open and a pencil stuck behind her ear at a dangerous angle. Alden had grease under his nails and the expression he wore when comfortable was something he'd found after the war. He lifted 2 fingers in a hello that felt like yes. Later, when the diner closed and chairs stood on tables like animals at rest, Lena walked the bay path with them and the air was a little cold and the stars were irresponsible. She took Alden's hand. He took it back. They didn't say future. They said now, and it was enough to build on. Back at the shop, they found a package on the step. No return address. Inside, a single item wrapped in brown paper and the smell of a man who wore too much cologne. Alden opened it with the care he uses for things that might cut. It was a photograph of Lena at 18 on a stage at her high school graduation, mid-laugh, cap cocked, eyes bright. On the back, in a hand that had signed 1,000 checks, "I did love you. D." Lena held the picture, thumb pressed over the initial until it left an imprint on her skin. She didn't rip it. She didn't keep it. She slid it into an envelope marked evidence and wrote the date in the corner and then, in smaller letters, the word done. She crossed the office and set the envelope under the unit patch on the corkboard beside a postcard of the pier at sunset that Lark had chosen and addressed to us. She stood there a long time, long enough for Alden to come stand next to her and for Lark to thread their hands together like a stitch that heals rather than binds. "Tomorrow," Lark said, not a question. "Tomorrow," Lena echoed. They turned out the office light. The shop hummed, bolts in their drawers, wrenches on hooks, a soft order built from 100 small choices made by people who were learning that safety isn't the absence of danger but the presence of each other. Outside, the bay breathed, and the pier lights did their best imitation of stars. Somewhere, in a building with too much glass, a man drafted a new plan, because men like him always do. Somewhere closer, a girl at a counter asked her manager how to say no to an uncle with a smile that made her small. The world was not fixed. It was only moving. They would move, too. And if you had passed by the Harbor Diner just as Will flipped the sign to closed and the bell gave one last polite chime, you might have heard a child's voice, clear and fierce, carry out through the door, through the street, over the water. "Please save her, Daddy." And a man's voice, steady as a hand on a shoulder. "She is." 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.